for the future. And so would you give a warm welcome to Dr. Riane Eisler? I hope you could hear that.
I did hear that. And I want to thank all of you for the lovely, songs and music and prayer of the community, the unity community of Ashland. And I want to especially thank you, Kathy, Reverend Kathy.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Dr. Eisler. I also want you to know your dear friend Jean Houston is in the audience.
Oh, really? Hello,
Yes.
Jean. It's lovely to have you with us. Thank you for coming.
And Peggy Rubin. So I'll start with this first question. What I find so inspiring about your work and your extensive research is that you have this way of looking at the big picture and how we got to where we are and how we need to understand that to truly change and not keep repeating history. So can you tell us what led you to do this whole systems research?
Well, I have a lot of passion for this work. And can you hear me, by the way?
Yes, and I would say, Peg, you can spotlight her versus me.
Well,
there we go.
Oh,
Just spotlight Dr. Eisler. There we go. There we go. Can you all hear her?
Can you hear me?
Okay, I'm going to sit down for this answer.
All right, I want to be sure that the technology is wonderful when it works. But I have a lot of passion for this work, and that passion is very deeply rooted in my own childhood experiences and traumatic experiences as a child refugee from the Holocaust with my parents. And from one day to the next, my whole world was rent asunder, really, from this cute little girl, that people patted on the head, to my parents and I being hunted with license to kill. And that experience in Crystal Night, which I experienced, all of that led me to questions that I'm sure many of you have asked. When we humans have such an enormous capacity, as manifested here today, for caring, for love, for sensitivity, why has there been so much insensitivity, so much cruelty, so much violence? Is it, as we're often told, just human nature, inevitable, or are there alternatives? And many years later, I set up to try to answer these questions. And the answer to whether there is an alternative is a resounding yes, stemming from my transdisciplinary cross-cultural research. However, we are unable to see that alternative because we have inherited our social categories like right, left, religious, secular, Eastern, Western, Northern, Southern, capitalist, socialist, from more domination-oriented, what I call domination-oriented times, more authoritarian, more violent times. And so we can't see it unless, well, Einstein said it. He said, we cannot solve our problems with the same consciousness, with the same paradigm that created them. And so I really began to see patterns cross-culturally, transhistorically, because I drew from a very large database, which we're not taught to connect the dots, really. In fact, what we're taught is to fragment our consciousness through our very siloed education. Every subject is separate. We're not taught to connect the dots, although there is a trend, and it's a partnership trend towards transdisciplinary teaching and research and thinking. But I very quickly saw that I could not answer my questions of my childhood um, without leaving behind both the old approaches to research and these very siloed approaches, and also without really connecting the dots between our where we all live, our personal lives, our family and other intimate relations, and also what happens in the larger society in the world. Um, and out of that came uh, two new social categories, which include family and childhood and, well, women and children. Because if you think about it, they're marginalized or just ignored in our conventional studies, aren't they, of society, as well as in our conventional categories. And they were the partnership model and the domination model. And yes, the partnership domination scale. And I first introduced those in The Chalice and the Blade, and they have been really the frame for my other books, all the way to my latest book, which is Nurturing Our Humanity. And that was published by Oxford University Press in 2019. So I think I'll stop here and let you continue.
Okay, well, that leads me to the next question perfectly, which is can you describe the four cornerstones of the partnership system that you're talking about and how they are related and why it's so important to move from them, to move them from the domination system to the partnership system?
Well, my research has been action research, and I've always felt that research can't just be, quote, objective, which doesn't mean objectivity because none of us is objectives. We're all internalized, like fish swimming in water, really, the current paradigm, which is a very fragmented one. Um, it's always us against them. And we've internalized this. Um, through our whole lives. And what I love about this community is that it's trying to really recognize actually what physicists are recognizing today. You know that two physicists received the Nobel Prize in physics for their work on entanglement, on interconnection on a subatomic level. So this is really one of the key differences between the partnership and the domination model. Um, that empathy, whatever empathy there is, that's not really suppressed by trauma, because domination systems are trauma factories, is reserved for the in-group, starting with the in-group of mankind and the female other. Um, so my research, being action-oriented, eventually led to the identification of four cornerstones because we need tactics, short-term interventions, because, to put out the fires, really, which are constantly being caused by our domination heritage, and yes, by domination regressions to domination. But the struggle for our future, and I will get to the four cornerstones in a second. The struggle for our future is not between right and left, and religious and secular, and Eastern and Western, or Northern and Southern, or capitalist and socialist. It's really between the configurations of the partnership model, which includes gender equity. It includes having, instead of these rigid gender stereotypes, right? a more fluidity. There are lots of trends towards partnership, and there's also a regression. So the struggle for our future is between these two really possibilities. And we need to focus, and this is what I think is very, very important, not just on tactics, on short-term tactics, but on long-term strategies. And this means focusing on the four cornerstones, two of which are really totally ignored um, in our education or marginalized. The first cornerstone, and I'll just mention them, and then later I can perhaps say some more about them, is childhood and family. You know, if you look at our conventional categories, they, as I said, marginalize nothing less than the majority of humanity, women and children. And actually, neuroscience, which my latest book, Nurturing Our Humanity, uh, draws heavily from, and I highly recommend it. And yes, it ends with the four cornerstones. Um, it really, neuroscience shows that, well, what we know today, that the first years of our lives, our brains, we were not born with our brains completely formed. And really, what children observe and experience in those first years of life shapes nothing less than our brains. And with this, how we think, how we feel, how we act, including how we vote. Now, fortunately, we are able to change. We're a very flexible species, but we have to pay attention to this. And I'll tell you later about something that you're all invited to observe on October 29. We're holding the first virtual summit on peace begins at home. Because if children observe or experience violence in their early environments, they normalize it, don't they? And they displace their fear, you know, their rage, really, at being maltreated to the out group in domination families, because they're also taught that it's all the fault of the other, beginning with the stories blaming Eve and Pandora for all of man's ills. And this is not a question of women against men or men against women. Men have to give nothing less than their lives in domination systems, just because some dominator on top, like a Putin, wants more real estate. And Putin, and I know I'm giving you some information about the first cornerstone right now, but you know that Putin lowered the penalty for family violence in Russia. This is unbelievable, but very believable from if you use the lenses of the partnership domination models. Because he recognizes, doesn't he, that there is a connection between an authoritarian, top-down, highly punitive, often violent family and that kind of a state. So we have to recognize that too. And the summit that we're holding, which will be virtual on October 29, well, peace begins at home. And of course, the second cornerstone, and I'll not go into them because I want to continue with what Kathy wants to ask me, are gender, because gender is not a, quote, women's issue. It is a key family, social, and economic organizing principle. The third cornerstone is economics, and the issue is not capitalism versus socialism or socialism versus capitalism. It's moving. Well, I wrote a whole book on that called The Real Wealth of Nations. And it is, the subtitle of the book is creating a caring economics, because caring is coded feminine, isn't it? And therefore it's marginalized in our economic system. And of course, story and language. I had to actually, well, I've mentioned some of the stories that we've inherited, like about Eve or Pandora being to blame for all of humanity's ills, or the stories of really of both original sin and selfish genes. They fight one another, but it's the same story. We're bad. We have to be controlled from the top, as in God-fearing, right? And I had to coin new language for hierarchies of domination. We all know these. Um, yeah, you're going to be punished.
Yes.
And hierarchies of actualization, where power is not symbolized by the blade, which is a symbol, chalice and the blade, of power in domination models, but by the chalice. It is empowering. And I'll end with that because the term empowering represents a partnership trend in our language, doesn't it? Because how can you have an empowering way of using power in a domination system? You can't.
Wow. Yes. Wow, there's so much there. Thank you for that. When we were speaking on Zoom day before yesterday, I was thinking about what I really wanted to ask you, Dr. Eisler, and that was, I see that, there seems to be stages of evolution. Like in the 90s, it felt like the late 80s and 90s, it just felt like there was there was a lot of awakening. I know I personally had an awakening, and the people around me, like Gangaji had an awakening, and Gary Zukav and Eckhart Tolle, there was this feeling that we're awakening collectively. And I was just so sure of it. And then more recently, it's just felt like, like our civil rights are being attacked, and our human rights are being attacked, and the environment protection is being attacked. And so I just wondered, it feels like regression to me. So my question is, are we evolving? Are we evolving?
Well, yes, we are evolving, but I said that domination systems are trauma factories, and yes, the conversation really about trauma, which is rising to the fore, is another partnership trend. Except we don't connect the dots. Look, children in domination families are traumatized. I mean, these so-called Christian uh, parenting guides tell parents not to spoil their children, going back to, spare the rod, spoil the child, so that 18-month-old babies sitting in their high chairs, their fingers are scalded, according to these uh, parenting guides, that their parents should scald these babies' fingers for not sitting totally still in their high chairs. Now, that is training for domination, first in families and then in economics, in the state, in the tribe. Okay. So we've really got to start connecting the dots. And yes, we're evolving. Look at the last 300 years, okay? All these social movements have challenged the same thing. The Industrial Revolution was going into high gear, lots of disequilibrium, and out of it came, first of all these movements challenging the same thing, a tradition of domination. I mean, think about it. The so-called Enlightenment, rights of man movement challenged the so-called divinely ordained right of kings to rule their, quote, subjects, right? Then came the feminist movement. And one of the things we're really seeing in this regression is a return to rigid gender stereotypes and to the ranking of male over female. And that is integral to this. But the feminist movement came challenging the, again, so-called divinely ordained right of men to rule over the women and children in the, quote, castles, a military metaphor of their homes. The third domination tradition that was challenged was, of course, racism. I mean, think about it. The abolitionist movement, the civil rights movement, the anti-colonial movement, the Black Lives Matter movement, all challenged, again, the so-called divinely ordained right of a, quote, superior race to rule over an inferior one, all the way to the environmental movement, challenging man's once hallowed conquest and dominion over nature. And it was during this administration's first term that we had the Me Too movement, that we had the Black Lives Matter movement. I mean, there are lots and lots of movements towards partnership, but we don't connect the dots. And look, if children grow up in a household where they observe that men and the so-called masculine, the stereotype, are considered more important and more rewarded by our economic system, by the way, which is another big element of this. Then the, quote, feminine and women and girl children, what do they learn? They learn to equate difference in form, because there are two basic forms in our species, male and female. They learn to equate that difference in form with either superiority or inferiority, with either dominating or being dominated, with either, yes, being served and serving. And then that is equated, difference is equated with those, be it a racial difference, a religious difference, an ethnic difference. So this is really foundational. This is why both childhood and gender are fundamental. And we cannot continue to ignore them. And the people pushing us back don't ignore them at all. If you really look at the current regression, a lot of focus on just those two cornerstones, isn't there? Rigid gender stereotypes, no gender fluidity, even though there have been gay and transgender people forever. It is really a question of paradigm. And Gandhi, for example, he said that we must not confuse the customary with the natural. We have to really think about that, don't we? We have
Yes.
to go deeper and we have to connect the dots.
Well,
And
with that,
yeah,
well, with that, something you said when we spoke the other day really struck me. You said our job is not to disrupt, is to not disrupt, but envision a better alternative. Envision a better alternative. So, what do you mean, and can you expound on how we both envision and enact a better alternative?
Well, the four cornerstones are, of course, enactment, because shifting those from domination, which we've inherited and which we keep being taught with through our language, through our stories, through our both our formal and informal education. Um, that is our job. It is to show, if we don't think there is an alternative, look, just about everything. I mean, the desk that I'm sitting at, the pews that you're sitting on, uh, they are human made. And so are our cultures. And we have to really learn about our prehistory, which is, by the way, what the Chalice and the Blade talks about prefiguring so much. I mean, there are people now who are writing about, for example, Çatalhöyük, which is a prehistoric society of both early farmers and foragers, where there was peace for 1,000 years, no sound, no signs of destruction. And yes, there was gender equity. Ian Hodder writes about that in the Scientific American. And he was interviewed for a film being made of me called The Chalice and the Blade. For that's my most famous book, actually. And if you get it, please get the latest edition, because it has an epilogue that takes it up to the Trump years.
Yes, and that epilogue was so inspiring to me. Actually, I was so happy that, in a way, my old copy burned in a fire. So I got I got the new copy with the epilogue. Highly recommended, because it really brings it up to date, and it's so relevant. That book is so incredibly relevant now. So we have time. I want to ask you one more question. And while I'm asking this question and you're answering, anyone else, if you have any questions, we have time for maybe one or two questions from the audience and one or two online. Well, actually, Jean's got her hand up. Jean, do you want to? Let me see how. I don't think I can quite get this to you, but come on up here so Riane can see you. Come on up here so she can see you and say hi.
In my goodness.
Yes. So good to see you. My goodness. I've been your student for at least 50 years
Oh,
and have taken some of your work, well, actually the main parts, to perhaps 90 countries.
I love that, Jane. And you know,
And
I would love to have you be one of the
oh, look
speakers.
up there. I got to look at the camera
she's
here.
in that camera. Just for a minute so she can see.
I'm behind you,
Good.
my hands.
And what I have learned from you over so many years is really how to create a world. And how to create a world times happens from occasion. We're in the midst of one. It isn't saying, oh, nuts to the old world, or get rid of these bums. Maybe a few, but but truly, we are in high co-creative new beginning times. And Dr. Eisler perhaps is the leading evocateur of what it means to co-create a new time. In the few times in which this is truly possible, I am stunned to be here with someone who, she doesn't know this, but I have admired for over 50 years. And to hear the great story of truth and co-creation spoken so poignantly and so truthfully. I am stunned, I am surprised, and I feel so blessed. And my question, dear, dear, great, great woman, to you is it really possible that we are in a new beginning times, as I really believe from all my travels? Is it possible that your work and the work of the women and men like you who have the courage of co-creation with the possible is truly happening in our times? And if so, what could these wonderful people here in this great town, what could they do to start their new order of co-creation? Where to begin? Is it with books? Is it with simple actions? And best of all, is it the love that moves the sun and all the stars? Which is where I suspect it begins. Please, I feel so honored to face you today. Please, tell us something of this.
I am honored. I cannot tell you how much your love and what you have said means to me. And I can't wait to do actually two things with you. One is through Kurt Johnson, our mutual friend, um, a webinar, and the other, I'd love to have you as a speaker at the summit, the virtual summit. Peace begins at home. But to answer your question, you have done so much in really understanding the four cornerstones. And yes, changing our story, changing our lives is something that I highly recommend. And you can, by the way, have a meeting. I talked about this with Kathy, Reverend Kathy, about maybe having the this community get that those four videos and meet
and do a study. Everybody want to come to that? We'll create that. I was thinking instead of the book study, she has a 4 video series we could do. Yes, we want to do that. We want to do that.
I think that would be wonderful. And of course, book clubs are very important.
Book clubs, yes.
I mean, everything that Jean said is important. I mean, look, we are the co-creators of our future. Our species at this point has not only the power of total destruction, once attributed only to a male, punitive, as in God-fearing, right? God, we have environmental destruction all around us. And that's why we have the environmental movement. But we also have technologies of destruction that are, well, bacteriological warfare, nuclear warfare. If we don't shift, I mean, as Einstein said it, we have to really understand that we cannot solve problems with the same consciousness that created them. And this has been my calling, really. First of all, my own awakening, because believe me, I know transformation is possible from my own life. I mean, for the first part of my life, well, I mean, it wasn't until the feminist movement that I woke up one day, along with thousands of other women, to think, well, wait a minute, this isn't my problem that I don't fit, This is a social problem that I share with all of these other women. And the men's movement, I mean,
we concur.
Yes, the men's movement is so important. I'm friends with Ekundo, who is one of the speakers, by the way, at the Peace Begins at Home Summit. It's trying to work on caring men. But trauma is a very difficult thing to change. And it's our job to show that the partnership model is not only essential for survival, but it's essential for thriving.
Yes.
And that it's a better model, not perfect, but better. And I thank you so much. I did want to say something about economic rewards, if I may, because as I write in the Real Wealth of Nations, we do need to reward caring. And there are some trends in that direction. The Nordic nations, Finland, Sweden, Norway, Denmark, and really beginning with Western Europe, uh, they have all been moving more towards the partnership side, more women, heads of state, um, women about 40 or 50% of their parliaments. They're the ideal in both the family and the state is the ideal norm because we're talking about what we value and what we reward. Okay. And they reward caring. They have caring policies. They have very government sponsors, very really generous paid parental leave for both fathers and mothers. They have universal health care. They have child care that's not only accessible, but well paid. I mean, we really need to stand reality right side up in our
Yes.
economic and value what we truly
We have,
value in our economic system. Okay.
right, yes.
So there's so much more I would like to share
There is
with.
so much more, and that's another book, right? That really that goes into that subject, right, of the economics.
Absolutely.
Is that what is that book called?
Called The Real Wealth of
The
Nations.
Real Wealth of Nations. Okay, so that's one I don't have. I want to get.
Yes,
We have time for one more question. Excuse me, Diana.
You, you didn't say what the fourth cornerstone is. Did I
all
miss
right.
that?
I'll repeat it again.
Story and myth. Okay, so
Story
I
and
was
language, because story is part of myth. I mean, myth
okay.
is part of story. But the first cornerstone is childhood and family. And
So
that's what the summit Peace Begins at Home is about. The second cornerstone is gender. We can see in the current regression in the United States how much attention is being paid to rigid gender stereotypes, to the ranking of men over women. This is not coincidental. And we really have to pay attention to it because this is, as I said, what children internalize. All these cornerstones are related. Economics, moving to a caring economics of partnerism. We have to reward this work because otherwise, domination systems permit and facilitate the rising to the top of the domination pyramid of very traumatized men and women, by the way. I
so
mean,
my question is,
women
can you
internalize this in domination-oriented families. They internalize the higher valuing of the quote masculine, which is domination, violence, right, over what is coded as feminine, caring, caregiving, nonviolence. I mean, these are not coincidental, and that takes us to language and to story. And those are the four cornerstones with which I mean, the two, uh, I'm very old by now, um, but there are two projects that are very much implementation. One is Peace Begins at Home. I mean, this summit, which will have really people from all over the world who finally connect the dots and help us connect the dots. Um, and the other one is a competition for stories. And Jean, your voice is so important here because people really, we humans live by stories, don't we? And we have got to leave behind and expose what they really are. Original sin, selfish genes, they maintain domination systems. Stories blaming Eve, domination stories. But we can't, it's not us against them, it's replacing these stories and replacing them with what we know from nothing less than neuroscience, physics, interconnection, and provide this evidence. And some people, even who have been traumatized, can be changed. We've all been traumatized to some extent. But the question is, do we turn that trauma into action to change the system for our children and for generations to come?
Can I ask you? Can I give you two more points, two more cornerstones to think about? One is empathy-informed Earthism, and the other one is empathy-informed death care.
Absolutely. And the Real Wealth of Nations points out that both Smith and Marx, there is absolutely nothing in them, in their writings, about caring for our natural environment, our natural life support system. Nature was there to be exploited. And as for the work of caring for people, starting in childhood, it was not done by a woman in their time, and that's what they perpetuated it for free in a male-controlled household. And that is the model in our GDP. Consider that trees are not valued, but is valued only is when they're dead, a log, right? Then
Wow.
it's part of GDP. This is reality stood on its head, okay? And our job is to stand reality right side up. And
I love
that's
that.
why economics uh, includes, of course, how we relate. So everything is about relationship, how we relate to ourselves, how we relate to our Mother Earth, for goodness sakes, and how we relate to, I wrote a book on education called Tomorrow's Children. And for those of you who are teachers, I really highly recommend it. It's used in Montessori schools, but I want it to be used everywhere. We have to teach caring for self, caring for others, caring for our Mother Earth. And
Thank you so much.
reality stood right side up in our education
Yes,
system.
right side up. Oh, thank you so much. Well,